We give you thanks for this time that we have together to talk about such an important issue. And Father, we pray that you will guide Andy, that he will be able to teach us well, help us to be able to be those who can provide support and impart his wisdom upon us. And we also pray, Father, that for each and everyone who attends today, that you will use this so that we can serve others better. We pray for us to be able to pay attention and to learn from this. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Today I'll start with this one. A Christian view of depression. I think that's very important. We'll borrow a lot of our knowledge from the secular world, but also Christianly, how do we see it? And then how to treat depression. I use the word treat kind of more ambiguously, kind of how do we view it? I think it's very important also in how we approach and try to overcome it. And then a very brief note on helping. So I know all of you kind of know already, but we have to start with just some kind of foundation basic of the terminology of depression and what it is. So I'm just focused on depression. I think mental illness is a big thing. But our main thing is depression because most people suffer from this in our congregation. So there's a less severe one and a more severe one. So the common term that we know is a kind of situational depression because of the situations. And then there's a more severe one, which is a clinical depression. And then so if you go to the third one, the less severe one kind of a discontent, usually, and then the more severe kind of hopelessness. And then the middle one is just the technical term, dysthymic disorder. So don't understand what it means, but it's okay. And then the major depressive disorder. So these are two kind of less severe and more severe. I think it's important for us to kind of know the symptoms of depression, as you kind of know whether people are really in which area or whether they are really even become kind of a situational depression. So we'll go with the more severe one. So there are about 9 symptoms. So when you have 5 or more symptoms lasting for 2 weeks, okay, this is a kind of constant depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day for 2 weeks. Marked diminished interest or pleasure in almost all activities every day, not just 1 or 2 days. These are the 2 major ones actually for most people. And then a few more significant weight loss, even just increase or decrease in appetite. Insomnia, cannot sleep, or sleeping too much as well can be a symptom. And then actually I bolded wrongly. 5 and 6 is not the special one. Psychomotor agitation, like you move a lot, or kind of lethargic retardation. You don't feel energy to move, and then you kind of fatigue, feel a loss of energy, feeling of worthlessness or inappropriate guilt, diminished ability to think or concentrate, or like indecisive, can't make decision, recurrent thoughts of death or suicidal thoughts. So these 9 symptoms, you have kind of 5 or more for 2 weeks, then you kind of diagnose that, they're having clinical depression. This comes from Albert Webb's right, from their book there.
Andy, could you explain number 5? I didn't quite understand that.
Psychomotor agitation, kind of your movement, you want to move a lot. You want to move a lot, agitated, or you don't feel like moving.
All right.
Okay.
So it's either people who are suddenly very inactive or people who are just pacing around like that, is it?
I think you have to look at 5, you see, it's just not just this one. And also here there's a two spectrum. It's either you don't have enough sleep, cannot sleep, or you sleep too much. So you have to kind of put them together, 5 or 2. Okay, not just 1 or 2. So that's for clinical depression. Thanks for asking, Dinesh. Anything you want, just jump in and ask. And then this is for the situational depression. I'm not an expert, but I'm kind of saying that it can be 2 years. The kind of the symptom is a lot less intense. It's kind of less intense. I'm not an expert on this. Maybe Anne and Rubina can say more. Why is it 2 years? It seems like more serious. 2 or more symptoms. The symptoms are a bit more vague. Poor appetite or overeating, insomnia or hypersomnia, low energy or fatigue. You can see the different spectrum. Poor concentration in the decisiveness, low self-esteem, feelings of hopelessness. I kind of guess it's kind of not so severe, but kind of is there. I think there can be different situations. A lot of people, because of maybe they break up, or maybe they have unemployment for 1 year, this kind of situations, or certain incidents in their life, they cause that. I think that's just kind of technical term. But whatever it is, I think the more important is to go to the other one. Okay. And also just here, there's other mental illnesses. There's more serious one. I think that's very important. There's the bipolar disorder. So depression is usually you have low mood. You feel very unhappy, you feel discontent. Bipolar, I mean, yeah, if you don't know yet, it's you have episodes of very low and very high. You become very happy. So it's called bipolar disorder. It's extreme. There's a different times when you do that. I think those are generally more serious. They are even worse than depression. It's harder to treat it longer and usually involves medication. Schizophrenia is even more a distortion on your brain. Usually it involves visual and audio distortion. So they actually hear something, it's not real, but they actually hear it as if it's a real voice, or see something they think is real. And that is called psychosis. Psychosis is just a medical term for hallucination. So schizophrenia usually involves hallucination. So they hear something that it's just not there. It's not real, but they hear it. A lot of time, I think people think it's kind of a demon possession or spiritual attack. Usually, schizophrenia, when Christian people, those who are religious, say it, to them it is kind of those spiritual attack. But a lot of time it is schizophrenia. Okay. And so this is just these are just the term stuff. Okay. I think what we need to know important is that a lot of times depression are caused by external incident. Because there's an illness. Sometimes illness itself, a long-term illness. Maybe you have like a irritable bowel syndrome for 4 or 5 years. You have a disaster, something happened in the family. A trauma, usually it's like abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, or stress, very intense stress. Usually it's the external incident that triggered it. So depression at its core is an inner response. How you respond to the incidents, but it usually always triggered by an incident. It doesn't just come like that. So I think the first thing we need to know is very important is these people are victims. They are victims of bad external incident that happened to them. Usually it's calamity or the sinfulness of other people. A lot of times, like abusive father, abusive boyfriend, girlfriend, that caused them to have the response to have depression. So that's very important. But we also know that, yes, because most people who are depressed have an incident that happened to them. But we do know that sometimes the same people can have the same incidents. The same people can go through the same illness, or they go through the same disaster, or even people who have gone through sexual abuse, they do not have depression, isn't it? So it's not like one incident, no matter how intense it is, will always bring about depression. It's because their response is different. So different people respond differently. So the same intensity of external thing, they might be able to cope it a bit better. So if you cope it better with the external incident, then you won't lead to depression. So depression usually involves a physiological state. So the inner response, your activity in your brain chemical change your psychological state, and then that as well affect your inner response. Also, those are intertwined. So let's say, for example, you're very stressed of your unemployment. Some people have 1 year unemployed. So then you start to get depressed. When you get depressed, then they don't sleep well. And then the state of sleeplessness causes even more depression because you feel more tired. The lack of sleep itself causes more stress. So a lot of times is how they respond to the incident, and then cause their physiological state to change. And that is a vicious cycle. And actually the big thing is the inner response. That's why I highlighted it. So sometimes people who have a better inner ability or a mental strength to cope with it, they can cope with even worse situation, and they still don't get depression. So it's also important to know that a lot of time when we are dealing with people with depression, their inner feelings, they are more sensitive. They are more sensitive to the external trauma that they experience, and they are more emotional. A lot of times the secular world, even in Christian world, we see them as like more inferior, like they have a weaker heart or weaker mental strength. But I think it's very important to say that they're not inferior. They are more sensitive. They are more kind of, I guess, they feel more of what is happening to them. It's not just a weaker thing. It's just maybe there's like your test bud is more sensitive. So their heart is more sensitive to the sufferings that they encounter. So as I was telling my congregations, a lot of times people, they are taught as those who are weak, but they are not. Actually, it could be that they are more in tune with the reality of the world. It could be that they are more warm blood. Those who are less depressed are those who are more cold-blooded. You are less sensitive to other people. These people are usually more sensitive to other people's thoughts, to other people's feelings. That's why they are also more sensitive to their own emotions. So that's very important that we see that. And we have to see that a person's inner response that usually is what the most, it actually is the most important thing. Not even, it's one of the big factor, how they cope with it. And then but also you have to think about how you cannot discount the external incident and also the physiological state. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay. That's good. You should be quite straightforward. Let's move on. I think that's very important. So a lot of time, hopefully not in our circle, sometimes a lot of people think that it is their spiritual state that cause them to have a weak, have this inner response. It's because they are not trusting in God enough. That is why they respond more negatively to an illness. So I think that I want to say is very unhelpful. A lot of times we see that. We see that, okay, a same person suffer irritable bowel syndrome, okay? And then the person has depression. The other person doesn't have. Also, maybe we might kind of surmise that one person trusts more in God, have more hope in heaven. That's why the person doesn't have depression. So I think that's a very wrong thing, you see. It's not because of their spiritual state, where one person, 2% of the same external incident, then they have depression. Like I said before, it's because of their sensitivity, their emotional sensitivity to the incident. You see, that has nothing to do with whether they are more fearful of God or more trusting in God. A lot of times we kind of think that those who are more sensitive to the incident are those who have a lesser spiritual state. So we have to recognize that. I think that's the most damaging thing in the church. Usually you hear from people who says a lot of people do not want to share with Christians or their depression. They rather share with psychologists who are not Christian because they often feel judgment from the Christians. And I talked to somebody recently. I tried to counsel them, try to advise the person to seek counseling, but she's afraid because in the previous church, there are people who keep dragging her for counseling and always asking her, what is your sin? What is the underlying sin that caused you the depression? So always finding a sin to the depression, even though for her, it's not that. It's all this, the accident incident. Actually, she has a bipolar disorder. Is diagnosed, but she has been keeping counseling. The so-called biblical counseling in the church, that she encountered, is all about finding the underlying sin. And you have to know the literature. J. Adams has a different kind of pathway from CCF. J. Adams is very big on every single depression has a spiritual underlying state. I was going to say that, there's some truth to it, but the way he pushes it is that every time you're depressed, it's because you have sinned. So we want to find the sin for you, and they'll occur depression. So that's not very helpful. Okay, let's move on. But we do want to say that this is very important. Even though it doesn't cause depression, but your response to God can help you with your depression. You see, I think there's a very big distinction to do. Often we see that as people who understand God's truth more, and they are more secure in what God is doing in this world, it actually helps them with depression. But that doesn't mean that the cause of it in the first place actually caused them the depression. You see that? But it helps them. And also at the same time, we know that it's not that it caused them to have depression. Often, those who are depressed actually affects their spiritual state. They cannot trust God. because they can't feel it. They want to have trust God, but their feeling is that they don't have faith in God. So often you feel that people who are depressed, they find it that they find God very distant. Not because they don't have a more solid truth in the biblical theology or whatever. It's because of their emotions. They feel that God is very distant. So we have to keep this very important, this tree diagram. It's not the cause, it helps, but also sometimes it affects their spiritual state, their response to God. Okay. So that's very important. Anybody wants to ask any question about this before I go on to the next big topic? Yeah, I'll continue. This is a big one, okay? I think I just want to kind of introduce that there's this thing called neurotransmitters. I'm not going to explain that, so I did it in 5 minutes in my church, and everyone's like kind of blur. So the simple thing is that as they do more study on our brain or on the study of mental illness, they see that neurotransmitter play a key part. The amount of neurotransmitter in your brain will kind of determine your mood and your feelings. And whether you feel anxious or feel depressed. So as they kind of have more device to kind of see the makeup of the brain and things, they find out that neurotransmitter is the key. And also they found out that certain things, actually the medicine you take can actually help for you to increase your neurotransmitter activity. So, you know, we all know all these past 20 years, there's different kind of thing. Adrenaline, or this concentration, dopamine is a big one. Serotonin is a big one. The mood, pleasure. They actually can kind of detect the level of serotonin in those with depression are less. They can detect in the activity. So what happened is that when they come with antidepressant pill Prozac, this is a very, very famous until now when it first came out. They found out that Prozac can actually, when you take it, it can increase the serotonin in your brain. As an outsider, I always thought that Prozac produces serotonin, but it's not. It's a different drug that trigger the producing of serotonin. So actually, even now, they are actually quite clueless of what actually happens. But they kind of stumble upon this formula of Prozac that can increase the serotonin. That kind of a way of doing it. So actually, for a lot of people, taking Prozac actually helps them. Yeah, sorry.
So if you're interested, if you go back to the last diagram with the neurotransmitter diagram, that one. You see the neurotransmitter reuptake pump there.
Yeah.
So Prozac is a serotonin specific reuptake inhibitor. So it stops, it inhibits that pump that reuptakes the serotonin. So there's more serotonin that is swimming around. So that's why it's an SSRI.
Thanks for the doctor's clarification. Yeah. An accountant pastor will continue. And so I think it's very important because there are circles who kind of see Prozac negatively. I think this book, Christian Murray is an English writer. He's a many years counselor. So he see that in circle there's a lot of people who are kind of have the hesitancy towards pill, but he realized that a lot of people who have good understanding of God, and then for many of them, anti-depression pill Prozac make a big impact on them. It's sometimes not just a counseling. This is own observation, not anecdotal story. For many of his counselees, the prescription of Prozac itself, along with counseling and support, helps a lot. So I think just a note for those who might feel hesitancies towards antidepressant pill. Okay, and I think this is a quick one. The treatment for it. So I think counseling is important for long term, right? So often counselor will say that usually the medicine will treat it. Have to be coming in the beginning to reduce the state of depression. Sometimes, a lot of times, the pill itself will help with the physiological state. So you know how you see when someone is sleepless, insomnia, lethargic. Sometimes counseling cannot kickstart the process. You need a pill to actually calm them down so they can sleep better. And then we can think better, then they are more suited for counseling. So a lot of times, that's how they do it. They start with a pill, and then they will slowly use counseling for long term. So this for depression, depression for less severe depression, that's how they usually do it. But we also have to know that there's an increasing abuse of antidepressant pill. Okay, so even for the past 10, 20 years, that's why I think some Christian circles are very reluctant towards it. They kind of over-prescribe. I think the study in US, some people will just go, they have a fear of public speech. They go to a psychologist, they ask for Prozac to help them with their fear of speech. So clearly there's an increasing abuse of it, those who just take it so that in a sense they can perform better mentally. So that's why you need to be aware of that. But for some people, for some cases, it's very helpful. For major depression, it's definitely needed, and it's a must for schizophrenia. And then for depression, for less severe one, counseling is actually very important, because as we see, it is the inner response usually that trigger all the bad thoughts and things. And so long-term counseling is very important, as they know how to respond to the incidents better, whereas they need drugs in the beginning. Okay. So let's continue. This is how to cope with the inner thoughts, with the inner response. Okay, a lot of times those with depression, there's kind of common false or wrong thinking in those with depression. They have a very negative emotions. They always expect the worst. They are pessimists a lot of times. Those with depression are very pessimist. Also, they are very hard on oneself. They often feel guilty, feel that they haven't done enough, feel that they're a failure. So they have very high expectation of themselves, expect the worst. And also, they misunderstand others. So someone must have a very kind of simple gesture of just not noticing them in the meeting. Then they might think that other people are ignoring them or not happy with them. So let's say they go to a room, somebody didn't notice them, they're supposed to notice. Then those who are forced or wrong thinking will think that they're not liked or that they're a loser, nobody cares for them. So they easily misunderstand other people. And then the emotions become extreme. The fear, anger, guilt, shame, disappointment, and despair. All those are more extreme in them. So this is what happens. And so what usually helps with people with depression with the counseling is to help them to have right thinking. Okay, to help them to adjust their false thinking. So to know the right thought of thinking, I didn't have it today. Like having certain things to help them to correct their wrong thinking, like not like give people a benefit of doubt, always think on the brighter side, and all those things. And then they talk about how you have a lot of things about how the exercise, more discipline, all those things will help them. But a lot is about how to help them in the way they process their feelings, process their thoughts. Okay, a lot of time that itself will help people with depression to as a long-term thing. So we have to know that a lot of time is purely circular wisdom. It's like positive thinking. Don't keep thinking about the worst. Don't keep thinking about people with bad intentions. All those are purely circular wisdom. As you work on that, you can adjust your inner thoughts. So that's why I say we see that a lot of times non-Christian counselor, all those kind of book that help you, self-help book, actually does work for depression. Okay, but we also know that God's truth is the foundation of all truths, right? The right thinking, right? The foundation of all right thinking is God's truth. So in one sense, as we counsel people with God's truth, how we treat other people, how God, like let's say how God doesn't expect the best of us. God is gracious, all those things. I think it coincides or is the foundation of the right thinking. So I say it's overlap. The kind of Christian supports biblical teaching on not being so hard on yourself, on having hope, all those things. They are better things. I think that it kind of overlap with how they can help with their depression. Okay. Let me just recap what we're doing here. So as I said, their spiritual state, their response to God will help them with an inner response, because it will help them to have the right thinking. When you understand how God's work in this world, how we are supposed to relate to one another, it actually helps you with your inner response to do with depression. but it's not the cause of it. Okay. And I think, like I said before, just to clarify more, a lot of time, like I said, sometimes we say those who have no depression, maybe they think that they trust God more, Christians. That's why they don't fear man. Usually we see those with depression, they have a more inclined to fear people's response, to fear what people think of them. Okay. And also, as I clarified, that's why sometimes we think that because they don't trust God, that's why they are more inclined to be affected by others people thought of them. Whereas those who know depression, they trust God more, which I think is very wrong. So we think that it could be just that both are trusting God more, right? But those who have no depression, maybe they are emotionally stable, or even they are more self-centered. Because they are more self-centered, because that's why they actually don't care about what people think of them. People who think about other people actually will be more inclined to be affected by people's opinion. So I think, again, kind of more specific. We have to keep working that it's not because of their spiritual state that cause them to depression, but it can help them, you see, as they are more secure in God's truth. It will help them, those who are sensitive, emotional, to fear men less. Okay, but that doesn't mean that they were, in a sense, more untrusting of God in the beginning. Okay, so this is just kind of reiterate what I'm saying. And I think this is very important also. Sometimes, a lot of times, those who have depression, those who struggle, it's actually an opportunity to know or trust God deeper. It's just that when we have poverty, when we have unemployment, we tend to trust God more. So a lot of times, people who have depression, they find no meaning in life. Their response to the pursuit of this world is that it's meaningless, like Ecclesiastes. Okay. Therefore, it is an opportunity for them to actually know what is a life true purpose in God. So J. Adams is right in one sense that it can help you to get closer to God, but it's not the main thing that causes you the depression, or you're less trusting in God. A lot of times in a mental state, those who are no depression trust in themselves more, I think. They find less need to trust in God. But actually, for those who have depression, it is actually, I think, God's grace in another way for them to find hope in the truth that they cannot find, the hope they cannot find in this world. So I think that's very important for us. But you see, it's a very thin line, you see, to see that how depression can help them trust God more, or to say that it causes them to have depression in the first place. Usually, I think kind of the line get kind of blurred, even in the nitty-gritty detail on how you counsel them. Okay, I think that makes a big difference. You might say the same thing, but actually just in the way you see it, in your tone or in your language, it shows whether you are judging them for their sinfulness, or whether you're helping them to know God more. But we have to be very convinced of this. Okay, a brief note on helping. Just a very brief one. I think sometimes practical help and providing company is very important. Often those who are more suited to help them are those who are near them, who can deal with their daily lives, their struggles, or their work, or their financial struggle, all those things. I think I give this talk more of people who are helping, not so much counseling. I think practical help and provide company usually is very important, as those who are working beside them. I think second thing is feel their pain. It's very important. Listen. Actually, it's very important. A lot of times, I do myself. I'm very task oriented. I'm pastor. I do have people come to me with their problems. It's always want to solve their problems. Wants to see, okay, you have stress from work, right? So how do you less stress in work? How do you don't feel so responsible? How do you don't worry about your boss opinion? Just go home early. But actually, that's not the important thing. Actually, just feel their stress, feel their hopelessness trapped in the work. Actually, listen is very important. If you're counseling somebody for the first session for 2 hours, just listen. Actually, don't give any advice for the first 2 hours. Maybe in the second or third, then you start giving some advice. Feeling their pain and listen is very, very important. And it's very hard. Actually, I think it's very hard. Sometimes it's easier to take less energy to say than to listen to their problem. I don't know whether you realize that. Listening is very, very tiring, attentively. Sometimes I feel that I listen so many to the problem, but I have no solutions. I feel really lost. I feel really frustrated because I can't do anything. But I think that's the most important for them actually, for you to understand their feeling, their pain, whether you're working aside them or whether you are their counselor. So like what I said in the other example of the girl with the bipolar disorder, she dragged counseling because those people, one is a pastor wife, just drag her and just do Bible study with her, just keep talking to her. And then she said like, oh, actually, I thought I can tell them my problem, but I just go there to listen to them. It's as if they need me to listen to them. Not that, I can tell them something. Sometimes people who have depression, just, people who have big mental burden, just want you to listen and know their issue, not for them to listen to you. Affirm their worth. I think that's very important. Tell them, despite their struggle, despite what they think of themselves, people love them, they can do things, all those things. Help them to change. So I think that is in this ascending order. Before you can help them to change, you have to be there for them, help feel their pain, affirm their worth. Then only I think you're in a better position to help them to change in how they respond to incident. Okay, and then the last one. So I think a lot of time, the cause of depression, I think, is also they have narrow self-centered thinking. It's not as if to say that those who have no depression are not self-centered. They are. But you have to know that a lot of depressed people, at the same time as they are sensitive, they are also very self-centered. That's why they get so affected. And they are too subjective. They are easily affected by emotions. But of course, we don't kind of single in as if you're more self-centered than me. That's why you're depressed. But you have to know that underlying, we are all self-centered human beings. And then that's the cause of our problems. So you have to use God's truth to respond to the incidents. You have to help them to be not self-centered with God's truth in order for them not to be just too focused on themselves. You have to help them. I think this is the spiritual part, how God's truth can help us. We are all self-centered. Actually, that sometimes the more strong people, their self-centeredness actually help them to thrive and to succeed. Those who are weaker, their self-centeredness causes them to depression. But both need to know that we are less self-centered, and the God's truth will help those who are struggling with that. And then usually they are too subjective, so you have to help them to treat people and things with more objectivity. Then I think there's a kind of more circular thing. You have to help them to do that. More objectivity, not just their own kind of their feel what it is. I think there's a more long-term thing. It's not something they tell them in the first session. I find this very important. So you helping them, not pointing out their sin or whatever, objectivity feel their pain. You see, you do not tell them that you should not be upset. You should be happy, right? That is not what you tell them, you see. It's as if you are kind of judging them and being in a plan with them. But I think on the other way, you can tell them there are blessings from God for us to rejoice. You see, you're telling them the same thing, but I think it's a very different mentality and help. It's not saying that you can be upset, you see. There's so many things for you to upset. The world is so broken, you've been so hurt, this trauma is so bad. There's plenty for you to be upset. There's plenty of reason for you to be depressed. But we can also have blessing from God to rejoice. So it's not to kind of dismiss their negative thoughts, but to add a layer of positivity on their negativity. To add a layer of hope on the hopelessness that they suffer. So you know their hopelessness, but you use that as a starting point to bring them to hope, not to dismiss their worthlessness. I think that's very, very important. And you don't tell them, okay, this is only a temporary world, back up, and then we can see it to those who didn't suffer, might want to give the kind of theological advice. But you can say a different way, yes, this word is very important, but God cares for us. We have a better hope. There's more things for us to hope. Yes, this world is very broken. We want to fix things now, but we have a better hope in the future, where things will really be better. And it's true. We can tell them that. We don't tell them, you have sinned. Why do you trust God more? Why do you repent? No, but then you can tell them positively how God's truth and promises can help us change our thinking. It's not in a sense sinful for us to have depression, to think that, but with what God has given us, with His promise, it can help us. It can give us strength to change our thinking, to change how we view our situation in a more positive way. Okay, so that's all that I want to share for me.